All right, we're about to take a journey deep into the past, to an island story that begins way, way before any written history. We're going to meet the very first people to call Sri Lanka home. It's prehistoric islanders.
Let's just start with a number that's, well, it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. 125,000 years. That's our starting point. That's the very first trace of human life on this island. It's a timescale that just dwarfs entire civilizations.
So that immediately begs the question, right? With no books, no inscriptions, not a single written word to go on, how in the world do we piece together their story? Well, the answer lies in a kind of archaeological detective work. And believe me, the clues are there waiting for us.
Yeah, this 125,000-year-old story isn't something you're going to find in a library. No, it's buried, literally, deep in the earth, preserved in layers of soil and rock, just waiting for someone to come along and figure it out.
Now, just to be super clear about where we are in time, we are squarely in the prehistoric era. We're talking the Stone Age. This is a world of hunters and gatherers, a time long before people started using metals or building permanent towns, which would come much, much later, in the proto-historic period.
And this timeline, wow, it really puts that huge scale into perspective, doesn't it? We kick things off at 125,000 years ago, but look how much later those famous sites like the Fa-Hien Cave show up at 38,000 years ago. This wasn't just some brief chapter in history. It was a saga that stretched over 100,000 years, finally ending around 1800 BC.
Okay, so where are we finding these clues? Well, they tend to pop up in a couple of main places. In Ratnapura, gem miners are digging down, sometimes almost 100 feet, and finding stone tools locked in these ancient gravel beds. Then, in the drier parts of the island, there's this unique reddish-brown soil layer called the Yaranamadu Formation, and it's just full of artifacts. You can think of these layers as our time capsules. So now, let's try to map out their ancient world. Because this wasn't a one-size-fits-all experience. For these people, survival was all about one thing: adapting to a surprisingly diverse island.
And their ability to adapt? It was absolutely incredible. From the dry coastal plains to the super rainy lowlands, and even way up in the high mountain grasslands, these early humans didn't just stick to one little corner. No. They thrived across the entire island, mastering 6 totally distinct environmental zones.
And where you lived completely dictated how you lived. It's fascinating. If you were in the high rainfall wet zone, your diet was probably based on a ton of land oysters. But if you were over in the drier regions, survival meant you were hunting animals like deer and iguana. They were true masters of their local environment.
So let's try to piece together a kind of prehistoric survival guide. What was a typical day really like? What was the day-to-day reality of life back then, in the Stone Age?
First thing you need to know, forget about cities or even villages. Your entire world was a small, tight-knit family group, usually around 15 to 25 people. So imagine a group the size of a single classroom today. That was your community, your family, your survival team, all rolled into one.
And life was all about movement. They were nomads, always on the go, following the food sources. When the heavy monsoons hit, they'd hole up in natural caves for shelter. But in the dry season, they'd build temporary camps right out in the open. And pretty much every single day involved walking, on average about 7 kilometers just to find enough to eat. So on those daily treks, what were they hunting? Well, the menu was incredibly varied. We're talking everything from big game like the gar, which is this huge wild cattle, and buffalo, all the way down to smaller, quicker animals like monkeys, porcupines, and even squirrels. It just shows you how skilled and opportunistic they were as hunters.
But get this, their diet wasn't all meat. In the Balangodensis cave, archaeologists found something amazing. Evidence that people were baking and eating wild breadfruit seeds more than 12,000 years ago. That shows a really sophisticated knowledge of plants, way beyond just grabbing whatever you see.
Of course, none of this survival would be possible without technology. Now, we're not talking about silicone and circuits, obviously. For them, technology was all about ingenuity, carved from stone.
Their key innovation was something called geometric microstone tools. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but what they are these tiny, precisely shaped pieces of stone, usually quartz, and they're rarely longer than about 4.5 centimeters. This was their high tech. This was the absolute heart of their toolkit. But here's the really clever part. These little stone pieces weren't just used on their own. They were components. They were modular.
They'd arrange these sharp little micro-tools along a piece of wood or bone, secure them, and boom, you've got a single, super effective composite tool, like a saw blade or the barb on a spear. It's just an ingenious system.
But beyond the tools and the food, it's the skeletal remains that tell the most personal part of this whole story. They give us a glimpse into their bodies, their lives, their deaths, and maybe even their beliefs.
I mean, the bones give us the hard data. The average guy was around 174 centimeters tall, with women at about 166. They had big, strong teeth and jaws. And, it was a tough life, which meant it was a shorter one. The maximum lifespan was only about 35 to 40 years.
And when death came, what happened next is actually incredibly poignant. They didn't have separate cemeteries or anything like that. They often buried their relatives right there, in the cave, where the family just kept on living. They kept their loved ones physically close to them.
But the story doesn't always end there. In some cases, something even more profound happened. As the source material tells us, they would later exhume the skeletons and apply red ochre. Think about that. They would dig up the bones of their dead, coat them in this rich red mineral pigment, and then carefully rebury them.
And this just raises so many questions. Why? Why perform such an elaborate two-stage burial? What did this ritual mean to them? Was it just about remembrance, or was it something more, a sign of a belief in an afterlife? The physical evidence stops here, leaving us with this powerful hint of a complex spiritual world we can only just begin to imagine.
And I guess that's where we have to leave it. We can measure their bones, and we can analyze their tools. But this last question gets right to the heart of it all. What were their stories? What songs did they sing around the fire? What dreams did they have for their kids? That is the human part of the story. That is, forever lost to time.